Welcome to Myth Informed. I'm your host, Brian Edward. Sean Frasick will join us in a little bit, but he is off the camera, or rather behind the camera right now. Today we have with us Emily Molli, who is a reporter, producer, and the co-founder of Subverse, which I like to refer to as a low-bias alternative media news source. Welcome, Emily. Am I right when I call it that, or would you like to reframe what Subverse is?
No, I think you're pretty on the money there. We're doing a lot of content that strips the spin, the slant, and the bias out of the stories, and kind of just gives people the raw facts and represents usually various perspectives. Because our whole idea is that we don't want to tell people what to think; we just want them to think for themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the response of what we're getting is kind of funny because so many people are like, "What is this? It's like real journalism, how it used to be." And it's just like, how did we get so far away from the idea of objectivity in journalism that people are actually staggered when they see it?
No, it's kind of funny. And I don't think there's any such thing as a no bias like
No.
media platform. I mean, just the fact that you're centering mostly on American issues and, Western issues, that there's not really much talk about what's going on in India or, Thailand because, the news has to have a bias. I mean, local news, local weather obviously has a bias, but lowest bias, you're doing your absolute best to make sure that you're not putting in your own biases or to
Yeah.
least as possible.
I think the struggle is always, we can't cover everything because we're not omnipotent, so we kind of have to pick and choose what we do cover. And I think that's also where you sort of start to see, um, you know, it's hard to, yeah, you can't be omnipotent, so you do have to kind of choose what you're covering, and that kind of is telling based on the content that we cover. But we've dabbled in all kinds of topics from geopolitics to tech to science and politics. We do a lot of on the ground reporting, and personally I have things that I care about, and so I choose to cover those things on the ground versus versus other things like local news. So I guess you could say bias can come out of that, or it's not as objective if you can't cover everything that's going on.
Yeah. But I mean, but a certain amount of bias or interest, I think, is okay. That you would, no one would criticize an ophthalmologist for talking only about eyes and not ever about coronary artery disease.
Yeah, and I think that's also the balance that we're trying to strike. We are trying to get interviews with experts in their fields, which even experts have their own biases in the topics that they specialize in. But it's better to get somebody to talk about something that they have a lot of knowledge on rather than having somebody completely unqualified putting their conjecture in and acting like they know what's best. And I think we do see that in a lot of journalism.
Sure. I mean, do you think like activist journalism is a big problem?
Um, I guess it depends how you define problem. I think it's a problem when they act like they're not activists. I do think there is a place for activist journalism. I just think people need to be pretty forthcoming about what they're pushing and the fact that they are acting as activists.
That's a good point. Can you give me an example of like something that activist journalism might be a positive?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for example, like there are certain topics that people care a lot about, whether it's, there's labor journalists or, there's, I mean, you can even take the kind of right wing, left wing divide that we have, and there are people who will only cover immigration and a certain aspect of immigration, especially if they think it's not going covered enough. And there's a lot of journalists on the left who will constantly be criticizing Trump, and I think there's a place for that too. Uh, so that's kind of, we're not kind of in the business of going and telling people this is what you should think about Trump, but there are journalists who do that.
How is that different than your beat, though? If somebody could have, like, I just talk about immigration all the time,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that's your beat. That's what you primarily cover. That isn't necessarily activism, is it?
No, it really depends on the framing, and it's really if you are pushing a specific agenda is when it becomes activism.
Okay. And if you're going to do that, you should say, I am an activist. I am biased, but here here's the reason we ought to consider X, Y, or Z.
I don't even think you have to be that well, I think transparency is what needs to be done, and it doesn't have to be in the story. Like, I'm an activist, this is what I am advocating for. It can be either in the byline, it can be in your mission statement if your entire outlet is activist journalism. But yeah, I don't think it needs to be glaring like, my name is Emily Molli and I believe this, so therefore I'm pushing this agenda.
Yeah. It seems like everything, like you have sites like Jihad Watch or Right Wing Watch or something.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that has the watch as its suffix seems that you're looking at something with a heavy bias. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right, and I think that is a pretty good example of activist journalism.
Okay. And, it in some sense, okay, fine, that's their beat. But if you do go to, say, Right Wing Watch or Jihad Watch, it seems like you end up angry when you come out. Like, all of this is meant to stir the emotion.
I mean, that's kind of the industry standard now is we do people, I wouldn't say we because we're trying to avoid this, but a lot of news outlets will do things just for the clicks, just for, what gets people to share things is usually anger, frustration. It's, people will share, fat cats or, kids doing funny stuff, but the bulk of what gets shared, and we saw this especially during the 2016 election, is the thing that it elicits a really strong emotional reaction, and anger is one of the strongest emotional reaction that makes people feel like, oh, I have to share this. I have to get other people to see this and feel angry with me.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it seems like you have, say, Jihad Watch or Right Wing Watch. Okay, well, let's put those aside. Mm-hmm. Is the mainstream media itself, say CNN, NBC, the Huffington Post, if that counts still, is news as a whole trying to inject emotion in, just to get clicks? I mean, that's one of the problems. I mean, you want to sell a product, right? I mean, I want to sell a juicier steak than the next guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis based on individual outlets and individual journalists. But I do think part of the problem is the 24-hour news cycle is everyone is just squeezing any kind of newsworthiness out of anything. Like, you can look at CNN having Richard Spencer on to talk about Trump's tweets. Like, they could have gotten pretty much anyone else, but they got one of the most divisive people to talk about the president's tweets. That was meant to elicit a very specific emotion from people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's a case by case basis, but there is definitely some outlets and some journalists who are more guilty of it than others.
Yeah, that's a particularly good example. Well, it used to be a day that when we just didn't care what white supremacists said and we didn't take them horribly seriously.
I just have a question on that. That one was interesting. First of all, I'm glad to be here. We're if you guys know something different on the set, it's boomers trying to figure out OBS. So. That's what we're trying to do. DM Google Hangouts.
Right. Xers acting like boomers, right?
Yeah. The funny thing with that Richard Spencer one, I think if CNN, I don't know what CNN was trying to do there, because most people that don't live online don't know who Richard Spencer is. David Duke, was he not available? Like, if you're seriously gonna have someone that most people know, it'd be like a David Duke type person. The Richard Spencer thing was interesting. I don't know what they were doing there.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, man, there's been all kinds of questionable guests and stuff, and I don't have a problem with having controversial people talk, but it's kind of, I think it has a lot more to do with framing and the content itself. I just don't think having Richard Spencer on to talk about Trump tweets was particularly adding anything to the conversation that is newsworthy.
Yeah, I agree. We got a comment from Danky McSwag that says Subverse and Tim Pool is militant centrist propaganda, which is
centrism.
Which is it's kind of funny, and that's why I love Subverse and what you guys are doing. It's because it is in the middle. I think the only true way to be skeptical is to kind of be in the middle and look at both sides at this, and not have that bias. That's why I really love what you guys are doing.
And it's interesting because, sure, we have some centrists who are either, contributors or involved in some way, but we have literally people all over the spectrum who are either contributors, staff, or, involved in some way in what we're doing. And so I think it's interesting that it comes off as militant centrist propaganda. I know that's a tongue-in-cheek kind of joke, but
Yeah.
it is funny because when you get all of us with our different political beliefs in the same place, I think it ends up, the product might end up coming out centrist anyway, just because we are weighing these different sides, and none of us are particularly radical on one end of the spectrum or another. I know some people have differing opinions on that, but I don't think, the fact that we're all pretty level-headed in our own political beliefs, I think that adds to the nature of our content.
So
I agree.
If you do have a bias and you know that you have a bias to something going in, how would you suggest that they tackle something? Like
So
if they want to
honestly,
get to the truth.
yeah, I mean, personally, if I know I have a certain bias that I have going into a story, I'll have somebody else do it. Somebody who doesn't necessarily know a whole lot about a subject, I can kind of point them in the right direction. But if there's something I'm particularly passionate about, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be the one who takes that subject on, especially if I know I have a pretty heavy bias one way or another. Like, I can give you an example. I wanted to cover an Andrew Yang rally, and personally, I support Andrew Yang, and so I figured, that might be an issue. So what I did was I took somebody who didn't even know who Andrew Yang was, and I sent her to the rally, and I was like, talk to people, find out why they like him, figure out what it is about his policies, and that was like, so if I had gone into that, I knew exactly what policies and stuff that I would want to focus on, and having her do that with no knowledge going into it, and just kind of doing a little bit of research beforehand, obviously, but not really having made up her mind one way or another on Andrew Yang, I think that really benefited her interviews, benefited the content that she got from it.
That's a really good point.
That's a really good idea. It's a really good idea.
Like specific, things, everything these days, all the issues seem to be lorded around with Congress and dripped with bias. It's so hard to get through like a meeting for when Google or Facebook show up at the House of Representatives or the Senate. What do you make of this? And what can you tell us? What's actually happening with like antitrust laws in Google and Facebook?
Well,
besides grandstanding.
Right. So if you get past the grandstanding, it's actually a really interesting era for our politics and our policymakers and how our government works, because basically we have this industry that's been self-regulated for pretty much its entire existence, because we don't have the legal framework to kind of, you have all of these, Facebook, for example, is acquiring all of these companies, and we have antitrust laws in place that worked for AT&T, worked for Microsoft, but now you have these big tech companies that have kind of slid by with very little scrutiny until recently. And I think a lot of that was sort of a domino effect with the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica stuff, and just the more that we see how easy it is to use people's data to manipulate things online, you start to get the attention of not just the policymakers, but the public, who then pressure their policymakers, their representatives, to make changes in the policy. So I think what we're eventually going to see is almost like we're either going to see nothing change at all, or we're going to see an overhaul of the agencies that tackle these kinds of issues, because right now, all that can really be done is dealing with the aftermath of anti-competitive behavior. The FTC and Department of Justice have to wait for something to happen before they bring it to the courts and say this was anti-competitive behavior. And it should get to the point where we can address these issues before we have to deal with the consequences. Because right now we just don't have that kind of legal framework. We don't have those kinds of policies in place, and it's causing all kinds of problems culturally, socially, technologically. We have groups, companies that are dominating marketplaces. And it is interesting, though, because there are some companies who compete with companies like Facebook. And honestly, it's only been companies that compete with Facebook that I've seen kind of coming out about this, but saying that, oh, we are competition to Facebook. Like, they're not a monopoly, we're competition.
Yeah, TikTok you mentioned is gaining.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, absolutely. And so there is room in the marketplace for companies to go up, services to go up and down. And I do think there is a lot of free market at play here, but I also do think that one of the questions that should be focused on more is what happens to consumer data. And a lot of the focus was either on Libra coin or on anti-competitive behavior. And I think there still needs to be more done about data protection, data privacy. And, we're seeing individual states kind of working on that framework.
Yeah, New York passed a law recently, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so more states are starting to catch up. But it's almost one of those things where, you have to look at the benefits or the potential consequences of having it be a state level law or regulation or a federal regulation, because otherwise it's going to be different for everyone all across the country. And when you have an international network, let alone national network, social network, that, that means they can do some things with some people's data and other things with other people's data. And that's just all those kinds of lines blur.
Well, the interesting thing for me is, I hear people complaining about Facebook and YouTube and Google and, all the big players, right? These people still, and Twitter, people still use those platforms. I mean, unfortunately, Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, they have enough money to lose money. They're constantly losing money. So they can invest in Libra. Facebook is talking about creating their own television content, trying to compete with Netflix. I still haven't seen that come out. I mean, they have all this money where they can continue to do these experiments on different things that don't work out. But I think it's time for people to move away from those platforms. I mean, Donald Trump's a perfect example. He's complaining about Twitter and, hiding his tweets and all this stuff. He's the guy that could be a catalyst.
Propping it up.
Yeah, he could be a catalyst if he chose Minds and say, hey, I'm going to go with Minds. That would move so many people over. That would actually create an actual competitor. I think that's hypocritical in a sense.
No, I totally get it. And I think there's also the question, personally, I can't stand Facebook as a company that practices the leadership and everything. But for my job, I have to use it to track events, track certain people, certain groups and stuff. So I rarely, if ever, post on it. And I wish I could delete it altogether. And I do what I can pretty much to promote alternative social media networks. And I signed up for Parler, and I'm pretty active on Minds as well. I had a Gab account. I haven't really done much with it just because it's not really my kind of community. But there's a lot of other options, and I think it would be a huge message if somebody like Trump, who uses Twitter just basically as his press releases and his press conferences, if he used an alternative platform that valued things like free speech and anti-censorship. And, I think he might get in trouble on if he used Minds, because he just recently tweeted against cryptocurrency, and Minds has a coin that kind of point. Yeah. But that being said, you don't have to have a Minds wallet. So if you used it without the wallet, I think that would make waves.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Now, what do you see that, let's say, things like privacy and then the anti-competitive behavior thing, almost running into their own conflict? I see, with the New York law, and say Mississippi and Ohio and everyone else passes a law. Now to fill all these regulations, you're going to have a lot of capital. I mean, as a small company, going to be able to even compete. So
that's the problem.
Yeah, it seems like big companies can use lobbyists and extra laws as anti-competitive behavior because they raise the bar so high.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think that's also why these regulations are so important to watch as they develop, because I think a big concern is, especially with the data privacy stuff, the more legal obstacles that you have, the bigger your legal team needs to be when you're starting a company, which if you're starting a company with pretty much bupkis, you don't have much to spend, let alone on a legal team to jump through tons of hoops. So I think having a daily active user cap, where if you reach a certain number of daily active users, then you should be held to a standard for protecting those users' privacy. I'm not saying like if you have less users, you should be selling the data. I just don't think third parties should be having user data in general unless they agree to it. But it's extremely difficult for startups to compete on that level if regulations put additional obstacles in front of them, because then you're really only letting the people who are still, the groups that are still big companies who can afford the legal team, they're the ones who are still going to be in a good spot at the end of the day.
Yeah, sure. And member count doesn't necessarily mean revenue. You could have a ton of members and be losing money.
True. Yeah. I mean, there's ad networks is how a lot of websites make money. And we see the power of, people boycotting or calling into certain companies, be like, oh, you're advertising on this Fox News segment that I don't like, so why are you doing that? And then they'll pull out. And there's a lot of volatility in YouTube alone, just with ad revenue. They had the adpocalypse not too long ago, and yeah, I mean, there's just so many different obstacles for startups even getting an ad network.
I know.
Even ad networks are pretty centralized.
I just wonder if this is going to end up like the railroads, right? Which were, again, self-regulated. And then we saw how that turned out, right? The robber barons and just the insane stuff going on. And now it's a government-run duopoly.
And when are we going to get bullet trains? Like, so many countries have bullet trains, and we have the landmass that requires bullet trains, but we're not even close to there because we're just so behind in all of that stuff. And I think, that's probably all connected.
Yeah. I mean, you essentially... You work for the government if you work in the train industry, and
exactly.
There isn't a ton of competitive pressure, so there really are both sides to this, like,
right.
And it seems to me it's really hard to put a scientific edge on that there's Twitter has an anti-conservative bias. Like, if you've seen studies on this, like, it's like everything. It seems like this is a feel. Like, how do you separate like I feel that from what empirically is?
No, I think that's a really good point. You see a lot of people complaining without any really hard evidence that they're being censored. And that's why I think it's important for whistleblowers, like the current whistleblowers who have come forward from like Pinterest and Google. But I do think there are some people who like will do a tweet, see it's not doing too well, and be like, oh, I'm being censored.
It couldn't be me.
Yeah.
I'm charming.
Well, but I think Tim has brought up a couple of good examples with this. Now, he doesn't say anything's definite either, but the fact that Antifa's still up and the Proud Boys are gone, or Sean King, I think that's his name, right? Sean King, who was advocating for this Antifa terrorist, and someone else is gone. So there are examples. And then the Veritas Project with, they actually had
clear example.
Insiders coming out and saying, we are actively doing this. I don't know. It's tough.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I would just say I haven't seen studies, so that's my main reference point. But there are absolutely plenty of examples of people getting removed from platforms. I personally was locked out of my account and forced to delete a tweet that didn't break rules. It was on my personal account, but it was still ridiculous. Oh, man, I would have to pull it up, but it was just this nonsensical tweet comparing hose to rectangles and squares and stuff. It was like a high school friend of mine tweeted and I responded to a tweet. And it wasn't derogatory or hateful at all.
Yeah.
It was just somebody, I guess, got upset at the term hose. Yeah. And so I deleted the tweet because it wasn't worth being locked out of my account for. But then when I got back into my account, I tweeted the exact same thing. And I just, at the end, say, I love them all. So that was, I guess, my workaround for supposed hateful conduct.
Nice.
But I think it's an extremely flawed moderation system, because I know a handful of journalists who have had lockouts over mass flag campaigns. A good friend of mine, Sandy Bacon, has been locked out of her Twitter and YouTube her Twitter and Facebook multiple times because there are people who will coordinate mass flagging attacks against her. Or she'll tweet a photo that she took in the course of reporting of sensitive images. Like one of them was a black sun from a neo-Nazi, and then Jovi Val was holding I believe a Confederate flag, and those photos either triggered the automatic whatever the moderation censor is or whatever. And it was just things that have absolutely, they don't take context into consideration, which is for me, that's pretty scary. Like I even know another journalist who covers white nationalism, same beat that I covered, and he was posting his photos from the course of reporting on Instagram, and they removed it, and because it had hate symbols, and it's like you have to take context into consideration for these kinds of things, and I think that's a different line than when Proud Boys get removed or whatever. But I think this kind of blanket policy is going to be a problem.
That makes a lot of sense. So, well, Trump obviously didn't take Sean's suggestion and flip over to Minds, but
he should.
But he did have a White House summit on social media.
Yeah.
Tim Pool was there.
Bill Ottman.
And among others. And the one thing I saw about it that seemed to make the viral Twitter was the Sebastian Gorka versus that Playboy reporter comment. Who I swear to, am I the only one that thought the Playboy reporter was drunk?
I was saying
he looked drunk to me.
Emily was there too.
Emily, were you there?
But I was not in the Rose Garden, and I was not in the White House. I went and did some interviews with attendees afterwards. But also
Tell us about it.
Like that whole Sebastian Gorka thing was interesting because you can see who cut out the beginning part, and I mean you kind of have to get the whole story. Obviously, what Gorka did was kind of out of line, but so there was the comment beforehand that was like, we'll take this outside or whatever. But I mean, that whole thing, like the fact that was what was trending after that kind of shows where everyone's head is.
Yeah.
I think I did watch the whole speech, and I think there was some important points made, but it also, I think Tim was right when he kind of called it a MAGA rally for VIPs.
VIP, yeah. A VIP rally.
But what was your experience there? Like, what did it feel like to you? Like, who'd you talk to?
So I talked to Carpe Donktum, the popular meme smith. I talked to Will Chamberlain, who's a lawyer, and he's a publisher at Human Events. I also spoke with Harmeet Dillon, who's actually representing Andy No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She's representing. She does a lot of free speech, and she also represents James Damore. I also spoke with Richard Granville, who's the CEO and founder of Yippee.com, which is an alternative search engine to Google. And
interesting.
Yeah, I think that was it. I might be missing someone, but I believe that was the bulk of it.
So they weren't all far right extremists like the media would have you believe.
That Media Matters article was I laughed reading it because it's like, if you really think those people are extremists, that is a low bar.
Yeah.
Like I've been threatened and harassed by actual extremists. If you consider those people extremists, you're nuts.
Yeah.
Hey, you can totally swear. We don't make any money on YouTube.
Sure
So. Yeah.
Well, I heard that some, I think I had some more moderate critiques that were saying, but some of these people were like, say, QAnoners or conspiracy theorists.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a fine line, though, between, how do you define an extremist? Somebody who's willing to go to kind of drastic measures to get their political beliefs, across, or I don't know, this is something that's been bothering me for a while, and it's especially gotten worse in recent years, is this kind of blanket labeling people of, either far right, extremists, radical. Well, I mean, because we do have a problem with radical groups, and I don't want people to get desensitized to that by labeling people who aren't extremists. Like, I think that's something that people need to take a lot more seriously when they just go calling people Nazi. It's like, I get that it's fun and it's cute and it's like, oh, that guy's he's a Nazi. He's like, it's I get that it's funny for some people, and like I don't mean to be like a wet blanket on people, but it's just like, you need to understand that there are actual National Socialist movement people out there. There are white nationalist groups that are rallying, that are recruiting, that are planning to, like, they love this. This is a gift to them. The fact that people are being labeled extremists when they're not is a gift to them.
That's right.
Right. And and the more of people that you have, then the more chance that you're going to have something like the New Zealand shooter like pop off, right? I mean, the bigger group of radicals you have, the more chance one's going to go crazy.
Well, and that's funny too, because there's a debate amongst our group here on the those accounts, the parody accounts. I am of the opinion parody accounts that don't explicitly say they're parody accounts actually are worse for the discourse, because you see a lot of these accounts, you're like, it's so hard these days to determine, the difference between parody and reality with a lot of these statements. And Brian's on the other side. He doesn't agree. He thinks they're fine. But I think I take your point, and like, if you call someone a racist who isn't a racist, what do you actually call the actual racist? It gets very
super racist.
Yeah, it gets very confusing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is a huge problem, and when you call people racist, and then they're like, they do become desensitized to it. It's like, okay, if I'm a racist, so is everyone else, and I think there needs to be a huge shift in the discourse, and there needs to be a lot less sensationalization of people's beliefs. We need to be a lot more. We have to understand that a lot of what's happening, like, to go back to the parody question there, that's like, I do think there is a space for satirizing certain personalities and I do think it needs to be labeled a parody, just so we don't have that kind of confusion where people are taking it seriously. But
yes, that's my side.
I will say, just because, like, I've been in situations where there are blue check marks who don't take their influence seriously.
Yeah.
And they'll tweet. There was an event in Georgia, and it was a white nationalist rally, and people were watching on Twitter to see what was going to happen at this event. And this guy with a blue check mark, he's from the UK, he was kind of tweeting facetiously like, oh, they're bringing in busloads of prisoners to fight the Nazis now, or whatever. And it was just like, he was tweeting these nonsensical things, and people were believing it. And because I see it coming from a blue check mark.
Yep.
And I had to tell him, like, hey man, like, people are retweeting you, and they think what you're saying is fact. You're here on the ground. You have pretty much, like, you have a responsibility to not spread misinformation about such a divisive and controversial issue.
Right. Now, my point on the parody accounts wasn't that if you had a AOC account, right, and you literally have her picture up there, then I think you should have it parody. But if you're, say, a comedian that writes under Titania McGrath,
Titania McGrath,
does that need to be labeled parody?
No, I think Titania McGrath is like, if it's not obvious that it's a parody, then that's spooky. Like,
but I don't think it is. I honestly don't think it is. I mean, there's another one that people are tweeting at us talking about the Andy No thing, and I figured out it was a parody account because I had to go through this guy's, like, website and, like, figure it out. But, like, it was just awful, like, language about Andy's getting attacked, blah blah blah. And he had all these people retweeting it and saying, yeah, exactly, blah blah blah. And then, like, people had to point out this is a parody account. But it's gotten so bad online that, the extremists, it's almost like they mirror the parodied accounts, kind of, That's my point, at least.
No, I think you've got a point there, and I think there's, like, a kind of a spectrum on those kinds of parodies, like, and it's an interesting question, especially when we talk about, like, being able to make jokes and stuff like that. So I think there's definitely some gray area there, and I don't think it's I think there are certain things that should definitely be labeled parody, especially. And then part of it is, like, people will start parody accounts that are small, and, you never know when you're going to get a viral tweet, and you kind of have to add a disclaimer after the fact. But, I mean, that's some gray area. It's an interesting question.
Or just
and I'm all about jokes and free speech. I totally support it. But the problem is the discourse is so damn confusing already that I think there's some harm they can do.
But wouldn't a better, like, solution, though, like, be to get people to, like, maybe not take this so seriously? It seems
but that's
this isn't scientific, but everybody that I talk to at work and everything's like, everybody says it's a polarized culture. Everyone feels it, but what can we do to like not let it get to you?
I think it's important for people to remember not to spend too much time on Twitter. Like, I know
Yeah.
that's kind of a cliche now that Twitter is not real life, but I don't think people understand just how detrimental it can be to public discourse to just, like, I think part of the problem is people usually when you're talking to people, you have an internal filter.
Yeah.
Um, you kind of have an idea of like you can read the room, you can read the room, you can kind of figure out how things are going to go over if and you kind of have an internal filter, and I'm not talking self-censorship, it's just kind of
Hmm.
like it's kind of using your best judgment. But on Twitter, and I think I've probably been guilty of this in the past as well, like you don't really have that filter, as you're thinking about it, you're typing it out, and you're not really thinking as how is this going to go out when I put it out into the world. um, and so I think part of it is people build their communities and they know how it's going to play to people within their community if they're
Hmm.
like-minded. But especially if it's a public account, and if it gets picked up, if it gets traction, if it starts getting spread around, you're going to have people who disagree with you, you're going to have people who vehemently disagree with you. And I mean, you just have to kind of go into your tweets knowing that
Yeah.
to a certain degree. But I think people in general just need to chill out. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need to give everyone feedback on everything they
Yeah.
tweet.
Yeah.
You can see something, be like, "Oh, that's horrible. I disagree with that," and then not have to tweet it. Tweet it. Like it's
Or
you know,
like it or
it's
hate it or comment.
yeah, exactly. Like there's so many things that happen during the day that I have opinions about, but I don't feel the need to put it out into the world. There are some people who literally that's their entire career is putting their opinions out into the world, and it
Yeah.
works for them.
Hmm.
And I think it's really a person by person thing. But I do think a lot of people go in there trying to fan the flames because they know it's going to get likes, they know it's
Yes.
going to get retweets, and they know it's going to get them points with their community.
But
Yeah.
aren't people? Don't you think that there's also people that are doing it for a more genuine reason? And I'll cut in. Robert McLeod with the super chat saying, "Love your work, Emily." So
Oh, thanks.
just throwing that
Thanks, Robert.
compliment right in the middle of my question. But like that are more genuine. That say, like God, if I don't oppose this, these people are just going to roll right in, and I've got to put up like an earthen wall for the radicals. Like, do you think
Interesting.
that there are those people that they're coming from a more genuine place, but now you've got them scared, so they're like an animal backed into a corner, and they're like no farther and slash out at you.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess, yeah, I really don't spend a whole lot of time on Twitter anymore just
Yeah.
because I find the tone of discourse like really depressing sometimes. But I think you really get some of the most obnoxious voices being the loudest,
Mhm.
and a lot of people are out there for attention. I won't say it's everyone because obviously people want to put their ideas out there into a space and get feedback and kind of. I do think it's a really good place for people to learn too. Like it's supposed to be interactive and it's supposed to be, some people love that kind of feedback where it's like, tell me why I'm wrong. Other
Yeah.
people, they don't want to be told that they're wrong.
Right. Yeah, it's these clout chasers that are. I honestly don't think the clout chasers are genuine. I honestly don't. They're going for likes and clicks, and the dangerous thing is.
But I mean the commenters though. You've got like the poster, right? But then you have
Yeah,
8,000 comments underneath.
But I mean, I think the most dangerous thing is the speed that we've like put into this equation with social media. It's like whoever gets there first and has the hot take first wins, kind of gets the most likes and clicks, and it's dangerous because there's this escalation. At first, just look at the left. At first, it was you're racist, then you're white nationalist, then you're all right, then you're a Nazi, then punch the Nazi, then firebomb the Nazis. And Tim points this out a lot too. This escalation is really, really frightening, and it's being fueled by this like angst on this online.
Yeah, but
angst.
and my guess is that angst genuine? That you could make somebody afraid, right? I mean, it in World War II, if you asked the people that
Yeah.
we were afraid that
No.
we could lose that war and that we would be
No,
conquered.
I think there's people that truly see it as like, yeah, I need to go out and do something. I think those that truly, genuinely care about humanity are actually out there doing good work off of social media.
I agree. Yeah.
Those that do, there are some that get affected by the discourse and go out and want to do crazy stuff. But yeah, I think those that are actually genuinely care about people are actually doing work to help people and not trying to be first on Twitter. if that
Yeah,
makes
I mean,
sense.
you have to kind of think of that almost a psychological profile of the people who, lurk on Twitter just waiting to get their reply to
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump first, or,
Yeah.
um, or even like there are people who live just to direct Twitter mobs,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, does that really make them happy, or do they just feel like they're being influential and they're using they're using their power? I'm sure a lot of people get off on that just whole power aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
But I do
totally.
think
And the
that there's
dopamine that they get, yeah.
But I gotta believe
But
there's some of those people in the mobs on the whether it's coming from
that
the
have
right or the left that
genuine.
are just scared. They've been scared. They're probably scared, overly scared, because what
Mhm.
they're reading is not accurate. But they think, oh my God, if I don't do this, we're going to end up with fascism, and it's going to be my fault if I don't take part. And then in the right, you'd be like, well, free speech is going to be gone if I don't stand up.
No, you're right. There are people who genuinely believe that fascism is a threat in some kind of form, or like this creeping fascism that's kind of like. And yeah, no, I mean, I think there is some merit to that, because there are fascists, and to use the like actual fascists, actual like white supremacist white
Mm-hmm.
nationalists who do try to, for lack of a better term, whitewash their beliefs in order to make it more palatable, just to draw people in. But I don't think it's happening as massive of a scale as people think. I
Correct.
do think it is happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the problem is, when you start to, it's almost like, um, when you notice something and then you start to notice it more and more, and even if it's like, it's sometimes you'll think you'll see something. I don't know. It's some people will, try to find things where there isn't
Yeah.
those sort of things. I wish I
It's
could
kind of like a
describe this better.
hypochondriac. I think this mole's getting bigger.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like that. And I don't want to downplay the actual problems that are coming out of these growing movements, but I do think people overblow what what they think the threat is. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of that does have to do with being stuck in these bubbles where it's constantly being pointed out to them, and it gets to the point where they can't stop seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point.
But I
Looks like
wouldn't say it's everyone. I mean, there is definitely those kinds of people out there.
As part of this, like you had a video on like the title was it was about loneliness, and do you think that politics is now an ersatz like sense of meaning for people?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of what we're seeing now is ideologies, and I mean, we can talk about how the more secular a place becomes, the more people try to find meaning in other ideologies, other
mm-hmm.
communities, and I think that's just kind of a side effect of the U.S. becoming more secular. I think people will look for guidance, meaning, and a belief structure somewhere else, whether it's if it's not religion, then it'll be in a philosophy. And if it's not in a philosophy, you want to find people with like-minded values and ideals.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the times too, like there are certain pecking orders that come out of these communities. Like you can see pretty clearly the pecking order in some specific ideologies. And I think politics for a lot of people is becoming tribal. And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but it's also like where we see this play out the most is in social media. And I think the reality is the average American isn't relying on politics to be their ideology, their sort of their tribe. So I do think it is kind of a side effect of just people looking for meaning. And like the loneliness crisis, it's people. That's why we see so many people joining online communities.
Yeah.
And
But that
it's
could be a
interesting.
good
Go
thing,
ahead.
right? But like is okay, but gonna finish.
Yeah, no, you're right.
It,
It is. I think it is a good thing as long as there's not too much like, as long as there's not too much of dehumanizing the other. I think community is a great thing, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing for people to find online communities that share like-minded ideas and principles, and communities are supposed to support each other. And I think what's happening in some scenarios is instead of supporting each other, they're just trying to bring the other down.
mm,
Um, which is why like there's an interesting dynamic with social media where it's where people can find their community, but we're starting to see more studies come out about the detrimental effects of social media, especially on teenagers,
Yeah.
where you can feel connected with all of these people, but at the end of the day, we do need human contact. We do need to
Yeah.
sit down with somebody, talk to them face to face. You can't always just be talking to someone online.
Yeah.
Well, the mental
And
health like rates of cutting have gone up, especially for girls.
Mm-hmm.
But even among boys, I think that's true too. And the amount of depression rating, again, they're like it's really staggered up for girls, but it's also significantly up for boys too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's terrible. And, there's Jonathan Haidt's book about this, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I think points out some interesting correlations I think it is a generational thing. And I think it does probably tie a lot into technology and family structure. And I think it's a huge problem. And I hope somebody, it's going to take a lot to get to the bottom of it, and it's going to take a lot to actually start curbing what's happening.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know what.
Well, there was a great study. I mean, it was Robert McLeod. It was from New Zealand. I'll bring this up, but specifically, there was a New Zealand study that Haidt talks about where kids were given unsupervised recess instead of the supervised recess, and they got like
Lord of the Flies.
five different. There was a nurse on there in case somebody broke their head,
okay.
but they didn't say, look, we're doing like they could play kickball, tag, no, whatever they wanted to do, they were allowed to do.
That's great.
But the idea was to see what happens versus like what we're doing now, which is like kind of all supervised play, organized play, and there were less injuries and less bullying. So like the normal pecking order.
Interesting.
Like this it was cool, great to the 5 New Zealand schools that were able to like be the not the control group but the experimental group on this, which was really neat. So I don't know. It sort of seems to me like, wow, maybe we do need to go out and play because maybe we just don't know how to handle social media. I mean, it's weird when the mob comes in. I mean, we felt it with MythCon. Like it was otherworldly. And if you've had a mob come for you online or you haven't, like that feeling is something you might want to avoid. I mean, it feels insane. And like, what do you do? And even the threat of something like that, and maybe your friend had something, like I can see that being a motivating thing or a weird thing. So maybe we just don't know what to do with social media.
I don't know. I'm a little more negative on this point of view. I think personally, and doesn't represent anyone on the stream right now. Personally, I think humans are just at the core nasty. Obviously, we have empathy.
This is the optimist point of view.
This is the optimist point of view. We have empathy, and we don't like to see other humans get hurt. And for the most part, we will help out when there's major disasters. But typically, we only come together when there's imminent threat to lives. Like social media, I think, is playing out in the same way that New Zealand experiment would play out if you allowed those kids to just be on recess all day and give them no structure. I think unfortunately, like I really think that the
but
strong,
we have people we can bully by reporting them.
No, like the strong individuals rise to the top, and then they'll exercise people out of the camps. I mean, this is kind of like our history when you look at tribalism, people getting outed, people. I mean, are we just doomed as a species? I don't know. That's the optimist note for today.
Well, I'd like to think that we're not doomed. I think we just need a good EMP to. No, I'm kidding. I think we need. I think we do need to. I think a lot of people treat social media like a drug. It's not your traditional kind of drug where you can't really ingest it. I mean, you're ingesting it through your eyes and your brain and your fingertips, but it is the way that it's gamified is extremely drug-like, and where it hits the same kind of reward centers in your brain. And
it's a good point.
I mean, I think people need to take a break. And I know when I go off the grid for camping trips and stuff, it just feels like such a relief.
Yeah.
And then I almost dread coming back to civilization because I don't want my phone to blow up. But I think people lose that disconnect from the internet, and they don't understand. Like I can't remember what I was listening to recently. I think it might have been a Joe Rogan podcast, but he was talking about like um, yeah, it was Naval Ravikant. I think he was talking about how when we used to be bored, we would just like stare out the window, we would think, and we would now when we're bored, we just pick up our phone and you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
we do stuff. And
Yep.
like I still love just like on road trips and stuff, not looking at my phone, like just staring out the window. And I think we need a lot more of just less reactivity
Yeah.
and more internal reflection, because I think it affects a lot of how people interact with each other. The more self-aware you are, I think the more you take that into consideration and other people into consideration when you have interactions. And I think social media has kind of robbed us of that and replaced it with reactivity.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess I'll stick to my point. Is like, even in the corporate world or the academic world or wherever you're competing, and life is a competition. Like, who can survive, and it's a competition of who has the most resources and stuff. Like, I don't know. Like, that's a thing. Like, until we get to a point where I think everyone just feels content with what they have. Like, I don't know if we'll ever change
But
it.
how do you do that?
I don't know. That's the thing. It's like we got to change our value set. We got to change,
But
what's
no, but I
important.
mean specifically teaching somebody to be content with what they have.
I don't
there could be a
know.
millionaire that's
I
not
know.
content with what
I
they
know,
have.
and mostly, and the richest people are those that are constantly or the most driven in a lot of cases. And I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know how you.
But maybe that's what do you think, Emily? The solution to social media is how to manage it, because I think you're right that whole the pleasure center thing, the addictive.
Greed.
It sounds
It's
like gambling,
greed,
right?
yeah.
Gambling is
Yeah.
a sort of a drug.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, well, how do you get over any kind of addiction? It's like self-discipline, moderation, or you just cut yourself off cold turkey. Like, I don't think, social media. I think social media can be used in moderation, but it really comes down to people making that decision for themselves. Like, I'm not the
Yeah.
kind of person who says we should put limits on how much social media somebody can do a day. And
Yeah.
I don't think Jack turning off Twitter at 9 p.m. every night is the answer either.
After playing the national anthem.
Yeah,
remember,
right,
Remember
right.
when TV used to go off?
Yeah. TV used to go off.
But
lot of
you
people.
could.
Yeah.
What about smoking though? Right, smoking. We didn't ban it.
Yeah.
But a lot of the money went into telling people that, hey, look what this does to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Right?
put warning labels every time you open Twitter. Have it say,
Yeah.
"Hey, this is
Yeah.
a really
Like,
addictive
so it'd
website."
be really interesting to see that, like some data on that, on what it does. That would be fascinating.
Yeah,
It would be.
that would be.
It's interesting.
Another thing I'd love for you to look into. This is my personal thing, so maybe it's biased, but is anyone ever taken, say, like the New York Times or WAPO or some of the what's considered mainstream media, and like either keyworded far left and far right? Because it seems to me, and again, this is non-scientific, that far right comes up way more often than far left. And at a minimum, that's either showing bias, that you're not covering the far left, or your Overton window is so biased that there's more far rights than far lefts. I think that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I think it also has to do with cultural context. Like, if you look at what's happening I mean, there's all kinds of like different dynamics between the far left and the far right, and I think the far left is coming more into people's radar now, just because most of the stuff the far right has been doing is, you can take any of the tragedies that have white nationalist undertones to it.
Yeah.
But I don't think people see the same threat in the far left as the far right, and I think that kind of is why we don't see as much reporting on it in that way, because I do think they are two different sides of a similar problem.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of differences, but at the same time, it's at the end of the day, if you're using militant tactics to further your agenda, you've got a problem. So I don't know. That'd be interesting. I bet somebody could put together a web crawler that goes through those mainstream sources. We actually have somebody who's working on web crawlers for us now to actually to work on some other projects, which I won't talk too much about right now, but. Somebody could put together a web crawler that goes through these different media outlets and pulls all of that information on, whether it's just typing in far left, far right, and then you can kind of take it from there, how it's reported on and how often it's reported on.
Interesting. Exclusive here. I just saw something come up. David Pacman got demonetized, so
Oh man,
that's crazy.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, and that's what's funny.
that's not the first person I'd pick to.
No,
be
not at all.
demonetized.
Not at all. But the funny thing is the more the people on the left or whatever you want to call it, get the same kind of treatment as those that were on the right or whatever you want to call it. I think you're going to see kind of a unified front as far as like, this is ridiculous. We got to stop this demonetization stuff.
Man, it's a killer. Yeah, it's. I mean, YouTube is completely different than what it used to be because now they don't actually care about independent creators trying to get their. I mean, people used to run entire businesses. Like they could buy houses, they could support their family, they could do all kinds of things through YouTube because people loved what they were doing. And now you have this whole demonetization streak, which is literally robbing people of their livelihoods because, there's the same kinds of problems of moderation that other social media sites have, whether it's, mass flagging or, the crazy thing is like when we upload our videos on Subverse, I don't put the keywords in until after, like I don't put a lot of the description or keywords or even title in until after it's uploaded and then and it's processing because we schedule things. But it's always when I put in keywords and I talk about things like Trump or I talk about, whether it's like immigration, there's certain things that if you type it in, it's an automatic demonetization. Yeah. And it's like, it takes no context into consideration. Yeah. And that is such a huge problem that we're facing. Independent creators can't keep relying on blanket just keywords being demonetized. And I get that YouTube is doing it to cover their ass in case some people are just jumping on trends to make money, but it's like it's ridiculous and it's going to be a problem, and people need to start looking for alternatives because it's not going to get. I really don't think it's going to get better on YouTube. I really don't think so, and that's why it's really, really important to not put all of your eggs in the one basket. And that's one of the things that Subverse is doing by using Minds the way that it is. And one of the things, like the things that Minds allows is way more than just video. It's almost like Medium, video, and soon Hangouts. Like it's gonna be a huge contender for a lot of these platforms. So it's just a matter of you have to kind of be everywhere at this point, and you can't just rely on one platform.
I have one thought on that, and I'll see people saying, "Oh, the right's getting demonetized, the left's getting demonetized." I actually look at this demonetization campaign as something more. I look at a division of Google, which is YouTube, that's hemorrhaging money, and I understand you can hold a loss for so long. Like if you have multiple restaurants, let's say, and two restaurants are doing really poorly downtown Manhattan, you want to keep them because that's the location and that's the branding, and you'll take the loss. But eventually, a corporation gets to a point where they can't take the losses anymore. So I always see these demonetization streaks as layoffs almost. Like it looks to me, it's like these are content creators, we don't really like what they're saying, and they're making money off of us, and they're not advertiser friendly.
Just give them the X.
Lay them off. Yep. And you'll see the super chats. Actually, you could still get super chats, and that's actually beautiful for YouTube because they take 30% of that. So John Doe gives you a super chat for $100. Well, you get 70, they get 30, and then you get less even with taxes. That's if they're going to go to that model, they should just start going to that model, which I think would make more sense. And I think that's really the only way another platform can compete, is if you perfect a model where it's kind of what ThinkSpot, what Jordan Peterson, I think that they're trying to do, is integrate a patron type platform to support the creators you like. The company takes a percentage, the creator gets a percentage, everybody's happy, and I think that's YouTube is just laying people off because they don't want to pay them anymore, and they're not making anything back on them. I think that's how I see it.
No, I think that's a really good point. Layoffs.
Yeah.
But I still think that there's a difference between full-on banning the channel and demonetization. It's a soft form of censorship, but it's not. I mean, if YouTube would have, canceled Steven Crowder and said, "No, your channel's gone," that to me is much more uproar-worthy than the demonetization.
And that's what I'm saying. Like that's what I'm seeing. Like someone like Steven or Sargon's a perfect example. They were probably making a good amount of money on YouTube. Not anymore. They're not getting any kickback. They don't have the ROI, to use the corporate term. There's no return on investment for that creator. So,
but they're allowed. I mean,
Cut
YouTube.
their-
If YouTube wants like cute puppy videos, then they can just pay everyone $100 at Lups Alone, and then everyone will upload this. I mean, and if that's what
if
they
you
want,
but
they,
it, yeah,
they can
but if
do
you
it.
look at one of the largest creators on YouTube, who is it? It's PewDiePie. It's okay. But also it's kids just reviewing toys or opening
Okay.
boxes and then YouTube can obviously get
But it's
sponsorship.
non-controversial. There's this.
Well, that's what I'm saying, and the sponsors.
I can feel
they're
for YouTube
sponsor
a
friendly.
little bit on this.
Yeah.
I.
Sorry, Emily. We kind of went.
No,
on
no,
like
it's
that.
interesting.
But what
yeah.
do you? I mean, do you think that demonetization? I mean, it's different. It is a halfway. I mean, the fact that they demonetized him, that pissed off the right. But the fact that they didn't cancel his channel pissed off the left. It was a solution that nobody liked.
I don't think it's ideological. I think it's
So I mean,
business.
in some ways, you can say it was a centrist.
It's a
solution.
business decision, is what it was. It was. That's how I look at it. It's a business decision.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how YouTube makes the decisions, but I think it is interesting that demonetizing wasn't enough for some people. I think it's never going to be enough. Even getting him kicked off wouldn't be enough. They would probably go after other social media networks, or even go as far as payment processors, and that's the thing.
Now that's
yeah.
scary.
That's scary.
That
is
where I don't want
PayPal,
to tell
Patreon,
YouTube
yeah.
or what they have to do, but I actually don't mind telling Stripe and
Yeah.
MasterCard and so forth that they're not allowed to take their image in mind on doing this.
That's like redlining.
Yeah,
right?
it really is.
It's like redlining back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
What do you think about when it comes to specifically payment processors?
That freaks me out, and that's why I see the big benefit in cryptocurrency is because it doesn't rely on financial institutions and you don't have to bend to the will of a financial institution if you have a blockchain-based wallet. But it's one of those things where I don't think payment processors should be in the business of politics. I don't think they should be in the business of bending the knee to an angry mob. It kind of shows a lot about their, I guess, I don't know if it's leadership or if they're just hedging their bets, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how they make those decisions. I just think it's a bad move and a slippery slope. And I know people say slippery slope is a fallacy, but I truly believe there is a slippery slope there. People are going to take that as precedent to make future decisions.
And it's funny. The same people that say slippery slope is a fallacy often talk about creeping fascism,
Right.
which is a slippery slope argument.
Yeah, totally.
So I guess some slopes are slipperier than others.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's you get to select which ones are slippery that fit your needs.
You want to take
That's
a
yeah. This is great. Milk My Mantit said, "G'day, boys and gals. Greetings from down under. Mate, keep doing what you're doing, both of you. Loving Subverse and the work you guys put out the works you guys put out, actual news. So that is compliment to you.
Appreciate
and
it.
Thank you, Milk.
And I
My
cannot do an
Mantits.
Australian accent. G'day.
Yeah, I will say
Can you do
this, and I agree with Milk My Mantits 100%. Let me ask you one question. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. You're going to speak for the entire company. So Vice, we saw Vice when Vice first came out. They were really hard hitting. They were innovative. They were unique. They were in North Korea with Dennis Rodman. They were in Muslim countries with Muslim extremist groups. They were like where the shit was happening. And over the last couple of years, 4 or 5 years, you're starting to see it kind of a backslide into more safe, more, I guess, more vanilla reporting. They definitely have taken on a bias. Obviously, a contract with Bill Maher and HBO probably told them some things like, hey, we got to tone some of the stuff down type of thing. As you guys get bigger with Subverse, you guys are doing amazing stuff right now. You're reporting on actual news, and you guys have an awesome take on it. As you guys start getting bigger and bigger and bigger, what are some controls and checks and balances you guys are going to put in place so you don't turn into the bias Vice?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think a lot of it comes in the shared vision that we have for, when we put our call out, like talking about, and I mean, I think Tim phrased it as news revolution. but the whole idea is, you know, if you watch his work, you know that he has a huge beef with how media works right now.
Yeah.
And just with the responses that we got, we saw just how many people share this this vision for what journalism could be, what it used to be, and getting back to kind of the roots. And I think a big part of it is going to rely on us keeping ourselves in check, looking at what our community is saying. We're extremely community driven. We take feedback to heart, like we really do. And for me, it's like I don't want to create the stuff that Vice is now. Like I used to love Vice and the content that they put out back when they were, you know, kind of cutting edge. But then they kind of started doing what everyone else is doing, and so like, why would you want to do the same thing everyone else is doing? But yeah, I think just this vision, our kind of mission, and the amount of like-minded people that we have, like despite our like totally different areas of like interest, political spectrum, and personalities, the fact that we all have this sort of unified vision of not being the crappy media that we're seeing today is, I think, what's going to hold us together. That in our community, because we're about to be community owned. Like we're opening up a WeFunder for outside investors, and you know the kind of caveat is that you don't get to tell us what to report on. You're just buying into this vision.
That's awesome.
And even the response to that has been amazing so far. And so we're really excited to kind of have it be community driven, community owned. And I think it's gonna this sort of decentralized nature of it is gonna keep itself in check.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if at some point, like the people talk about a pendulum swing, and that there's that the tension's so high that people are like, all right, I can't stand it. What do? Oh, there's media out there. Like, I need to get my news, but I can go to a place that isn't going to ruffle my feathers. I know it, and then
I can trust
that could actually win in a market strategy against the what's now winning is clickbait.
Right, and it's actually really, like, my favorite part is sometimes just seeing what, you know, they always tell you never to read the YouTube comments, but and there's some truth to that, but at the same time, like, the amount of support that we've gotten, not just through YouTube, but also like PayPal, and just people leaving us really nice feedback and saying, you know, there was one comment I remember, like, my wife asked me about what's happening in Iran. I said it's complicated, so I went to Subverse to see if there was a video on it, and that was what they used in order to kind of get their sort of jumping off point. And so just seeing the feedback where people say, this is my go-to news source, this is what I've been waiting for, this is the outlet we need, like all that kind of stuff, that makes me so happy to go to work every day. And I do really think it's going to be a winning strategy.
Yeah, and I agree. It's tough, you know, because we're told when you hear something from The Hill, or when you hear something from Vox, or when you hear something from BuzzFeed or whatever, you know, obviously you got to check your sources, and it's exhausting. You know, like we already have a limited time in the day to, you know, get the news. Who wants to go, okay, this is what Vox says, okay, this is what The Hill says, this is what... It's so nice being able to go to you guys and saying, okay, what's the real story? What am I actually looking for? What are the facts? And let me make up my decision from there, because...
Exactly, yeah, nobody has the time to go read from like the left rags to the right rags, basically. And, you know, you shouldn't have to do that. Like, it's... let us do that. Let us go through all of the information and then give it to you. And I think we're going to be doing a lot more we're going to be doing a lot more in the upcoming weeks, and just down the line in general with getting out. Right now we're only doing one 10-minute video a day, and next week we're actually going to be doing multiple videos a day, which I'm really excited for, because our team is working really hard. And when you hire people on, you know, it takes a minute to kind of get everyone up to speed, and but it's just the leaps and bounds that they're making. I'm really excited about, and I can't wait to keep getting more content out. And I think it's going to be super interesting to see how people react to the shorter videos as well as the longer videos.
Yeah, shorter's always good. I mean, people's attention span, but sometimes you
Well,
need the
I don't
longer
know. Joe
ones.
Rogan's got a lot of views, and he's got 2 hour
That's true, and
podcasts.
it's always
Yeah,
during the workday that he's got like 70,000 people.
I know. It's
Who's
like people
who's-
watching at work.
Yeah, who's
Yeah,
got these
we
jobs?
we let our employees watch Joe Rogan if they have their work finished. And so
But what if you're a
because-
truck driver?
That's a
oh my God!
cool
Think of how
workplace.
smart you could be. You're just like listening to
Oh, I
podcasts all
know.
day and driving.
Oh
cross
yeah,
country.
absolutely. Yeah. So
absolutely, yeah.
we're
All
really
kinds of important cultural conversations happening on podcasts, so it's extremely important.
absolutely, and we are truly honored to work with you
Yeah.
guys on this next event coming up in Jersey. Actually, it's a series. Let me point that out. It's a series. First event being in New Jersey, Mine's IRL, New Jersey. We're really excited to work
August
with you
31st.
guys. August 31st, Saturday, August 31st. There's still tickets. Get your tickets. Emily's going to be there. Tim's going to be there. Bill Ottman from Mine's going to be there. There's a whole ton of people we're bringing together. And
It's great because you get to talk to people. Like,
well,
you know?
yeah, you get to talk to people, but it was also great, like how our 3 organizations kind of met up with the same mission of bringing people together, having these conversations,
Yes.
bridging these gaps, seeing that, seeing the actual context, because when you see on Twitter and Facebook, I mean, people lose the context in these discussions, and it's always one-upping the other person. This doesn't happen when you're next to someone, when you're live, when you're actually meeting someone. Oh, you're Milk My Man Tits on YouTube? Nice to finally meet you, Thank you for the super chat. I mean, we're completely different in real life, and I'm really excited for that. And don't believe the hype. Like, people will it hasn't been bad for this event, which is great, but a lot of people try and drum things up and say, oh, it's going to be this and that, and even the bomb threat we had last year, and why it was such garbage nonsense. I mean, this is nothing but just just a obstacle in the road that it's nonsense, and it's really cool. Everyone's really has a lot of fun in person, and and I'll let Brian. I'll let you.
Well, no, I was just gonna say that the crowd too. I
Yeah.
see a lot of people saying, "Oh wow, there's an echo chamber," and that it's just the
Yeah.
opposite.
Yeah.
You're gonna find the only echo, the one value that people share is that we ought to listen to
Yeah.
the different sides, and you're gonna see
You have
people
all-
across the political
yes.
spectrum there.
All
yeah.
And that's
views.
why it's the best place, because it's a lot more fun talking to those that disagree with you,
Yeah.
especially when
Oh,
you can
yeah.
have a sane
Oh, yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
So
really
we're
excited.
looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah, really excited to see that again and do that again.
Yeah, me too.
So, Emily, so thank you for coming on. Is there anything you
My
want to
pleasure.
make sure we mention before we get off air?
I mean, just tune in to Subverse on YouTube every week. We have new videos at 7 p.m. and we're going to be putting out a lot more. And yeah, we just also got some T-shirts and stuff on our Teespring. So if you're a fan, you can get your own Subverse merch and represent.
That's awesome. And you're Moms, MOMES, Molli,
Yeah, Moms
MOLLI
Molly
on Twitter.
Mhm.
I'm
I'm
gonna
also the same handle on Minds as well.
I'm gonna try and figure out how to shut down the stream, so I'll let Brian close out the show. But stay on, Emily. We're gonna
right.
talk with you for.
But yeah, no,
Okay.
I think that was. I mean, I'll give one last shout out to an interesting comment. Somebody said Joe Rogan's got a global audience, so those people
Yeah.
could be in Europe. That
True.
was, yeah, that was a good call. I think he may have that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, thanks a lot, Emily. We
Oh,
really
my
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Okay.